Hi there, welcome to this presentation on desired state configuration, part of PowerShell version 4. This is part of the Transform the Data Center track in the MVP Cloud OS Week Online in March 2014. I'm very glad you could join us today. My name's Jonathan Noble. I've been fortunate enough to be a Microsoft MVP 4 times for Windows PowerShell now. You can find me online in a variety of different places. Usually I go by J.O. Noble. It's J.O. because my middle initial's O, not because I like to shorten Jonathan. If you head up to about.me/J.O. Noble, you can find all the websites and places that I post online. I am based in the northeast of England in Newcastle. Here I help run a user group called NEBytes, where we cover the Microsoft stack for all IT pros and developers, and related topics as well. We're always happy to have visitors come and see us up here, and always happy to have people come and talk, so hit us up on the website if you're interested in that. Day job, I'm a member of the Infrastructure Systems Group at Newcastle University. We look after Windows and Unix infrastructure, so for my part that means Active Directory, Exchange, Office 365, IIS, a bit of SQL Server, and also Forefront Identity Manager. So, what we're going to talk about here is what is desired state configuration. It's a new part of PowerShell. It's actually the final piece of what was the original vision for PowerShell. We're going to look at how it relates to everything else that's in there, look at the different ways of deploying DSC and also extending it. Now, PowerShell version 4 is part of the Windows Management Framework 4. DSC is really a technology that's part of Windows Server 2012 R2, so that's what we're looking at today. So, I've got a VM here running Windows Server 2012 R2. What we're looking at here is the Windows PowerShell Ise, for those who haven't seen it before. What I'm doing here is just putting in an old school PowerShell command. This is the equivalent of make dir, to create a directory, and this really shows what PowerShell was in the past. Up until this point it's been an imperative language where I could create a directory, and if somebody deleted the directory, the fact that I ran a command once upon a time to create it doesn't matter, that's history. Desired state configuration changes that. First of all, we're going to look at configuration. So what we have, for those who've used PowerShell before, is something that looks very much like a PowerShell function. It's just a different keyword. I'm giving it a friendly name, so in this case my configuration is for an IIS web server, and inside of here another new keyword, node. Now it's node rather than computer name because we're talking about managed nodes, and those in the future might be top of rack switches or something else, not necessarily a computer. In that case it is the computer name that we're using. So the first thing that we're putting in our configuration is using the Windows feature resource. DSC is made up of configurations and resources working together, and there are a number of built-in resources. Windows feature is one of those, and in this case I've given it a friendly name of IIS, and we're saying that we want it to be present. We can also ensure it's absent, but the feature that we're installing here is the web server feature, and we're going to take that a little step further. We're going to add ASP.NET, and so again we ensure that it's present, and we just have to put in the correct naming to ensure that we get that role feature. So the Windows feature resource is for installing roles and role features. Now if we create a web server with just that, we'll get a default page and that will be fine, but what we can do is use the file resource. Again, a friendly name, we'll just call it web content, and we're going to give it some properties here. Now, the interesting thing about this, people who haven't been using PowerShell before, aren't familiar with PowerShell, can get what's being done here. You can understand it, it's readable to a normal person. You don't have to have a whole load of PowerShell knowledge to understand what's going on with this configuration. And that's really the nice thing about this. The configuration is an extension of the PowerShell language. It's a declarative extension to the PowerShell language. But you don't actually have to author your DSC configurations like this. What's going to come out of this is an industry standard MOF file. You could even author it in Notepad, but you probably wouldn't want to do that, especially given that the ISE here gives you some nice context sensitive highlighting and also some code completion. So you can see here we're just copying some web content on here. We've just got a source path, destination path. Now, interestingly, the destination path is in inetpub, which, because this isn't a web server yet, doesn't exist. So the last part of this, we're using depends on, and we're referencing the Windows feature that we gave the friendly name of IIS to earlier. And so DSC will process this part of the configuration after it's done the section called IIS. And that means that we could actually have this file in any order that we wanted. Now we're just going to commit that configuration, and like we would with a PowerShell function, we just need to call its name in order to run it. So we'll do that with the run selection tool. And you can see what we get out of that is, like I said, a MOF file, and it's got the name of the node, and there we can go and find that, and then you can have a look at what's inside there. So, as I say, this is an industry standard MOF file format. You can actually read it, it's fairly straightforward what it's doing, but if you look at it, it's twice as long as our configuration, and our file's actually half full of empty space just for formatting. So the version that you're getting with PowerShell, the version that you're authoring in PowerShell, is actually much easier to deal with. And it's nice to just let PowerShell do the heavy lifting of converting that into a resulting schema. Now if we use this little tool on the side of the ISE here, we can find the commandlet that we need to start using this DSC configuration. I'm actually just going to type it in rather than use the tool at the side. But essentially what we need to do is tell it where we're applying this to in the first instance. And then the path to the file. And what I'm going to do is tell it to wait, because by default, if we run this without the wait parameter, it's going to do it as a background job, and we'll just get a prompt back. We won't see what's going on, and we'll say verbose because we want to see everything that's going on. Now, because this is the first time we've run this configuration, we're actually targeting the local machine, which is a brand new VM. It's going to take a little while. So while we do that, let's talk about the other things that are included, the other DSC resources. We've already used file there, which is used for manipulating files and folders. Archive is there for working with zip files, so if you copy in a zip file, you can unpack it on the machine. And a package, the package resource lets you install software, so run MSIs or run setup.exe. A Windows feature we've seen works with roles and role features. The environment resource is for managing environment variables. The registry is pretty self-explanatory. Then we can manage Windows processes and services. Interesting thing that we perhaps should add to this configuration is to make sure that the appropriate services are running for IIS once it's installed. You've got a couple of resources there for managing local users and groups. And then there is a log resource which is used to enable you to write into the event log for DSC. The last one on the list there, script, is basically a catch-all for everything else that you might want to do. You can have PowerShell scripts run on the target node, and you can do pretty much anything you can do with PowerShell. That's the list of resources that come in the box. You can actually do an awful lot more by writing your own resources, and they are authored in PowerShell, a little bit like you would write a PowerShell module. Now we can see that going on in the background there. You'll notice the warning that just says that Windows Update isn't running on the machine. That's partly because it's a VM that can't see the outside world, and it's because, like I say, a brand new VM. So it's running through there. We've got the IIS feature installed. It checked the prerequisites and got those installed. Same for ASP.NET. And then right at the very end, we'll see very quickly it does the file copy to get our web content on there. There we go. So the whole thing took a little while, but like I say, that's the first run. Now let's have a look and make sure that it's worked for us. So we should have a fully working web server. Let's see. On Server Manager we can see now that the IIS server is going to be running. There we go. And we'll be able to see our content files. We've got inetpub, www.root, and what it's copied in there is a default.html and an images folder with a few images. So let's see what that looks like, just to make sure. I should probably say at this point that I'm unfortunately not available for web design work, although I'm sure after seeing this, people are going to be knocking down my door. So that's our website. As you see, I wrote next to nothing that was at all unreadable. You could give that to, to a relative, and they could largely see what's going on in that configuration file. Now, speaking of people who might not know exactly what they're doing, let's imagine that somebody has admin rights to this machine who maybe shouldn't, and they decide that that images folder maybe isn't necessary. Now, unfortunately, that's broken my beautiful web page, but the great thing about DSC, over and above an imperative setup of this, is that desired state configuration would run on a schedule. It's going to run every 15 minutes normally. I'll kick it off here because we haven't got 15 minutes to wait. And that's just going to go and have a look and make sure that things are as they should be, and it's found that that images folder has been missing, and it's replaced the content. Everything else it just skipped because it didn't need to do it again. So that's great for one machine, but what if you want to do several machines? Say you've got a web farm. Well, what we can do is create an environment file which defines our landscape, essentially. So the syntax of this file is a little bit trickier, but it's still pretty readable when it comes down to it, although you have got a hash table containing an array of hash tables. So we're going to stick our node in here, and we're going to say that its role is a web server, but we're just going to call it web in this instance. We get to decide what we call the role. And let's just add a few more in, just for the sake of the demo. So we'll call them Demo 2, DSC Demo 2 and Demo 3. And we just need to go and make a minor change. Let's save this file and then make a minor change to our configuration to tell it to use this environment file. Now we could actually have a variety of different things in here. I'm going to save it as a PSD1, a PowerShell data file. We could have a variety of machines with different roles. We might have a baseline of features that we want to install on everything. But in this case, we're actually going to just be looking at the web stuff because we're limited to time. And so we're changing out the node name. And what we're doing here is something that's new in PowerShell 4. This .where syntax is really useful. Rather than taking a variable and piping it to where object to filter it, we can actually just do .where and have a script block in there to do the filtering for us. And at the end we're just saying the node name, picking the node name up. We could equally have put an array of nodes in there separated by commas. Now we're just going to call our configuration again, and this time we're going to pass it a configuration data parameter and give it our environment file. And now we get 3 MOF files which would apply to those 3 different machines. 2 of them don't exist, so we'll not worry about that just now. Okay, so that's pushing configuration onto machines. We're going to switch over now onto a different server, and this is one that I'm going to set up as a DSC pull server. Now, what I've done differently on here, apart from installing a couple of hotfixes that are required for this machine again isn't connected to the internet, so I had to install those manually. You'd get them via Windows Update normally. What I've done is I've pulled down a load of resources, some from Microsoft. There's a desired state configuration resource kit on TechNet, and also Powershell.org has a repository on GitHub of some DSC resources, and they've been written by a variety of different people, many of them PowerShell MVPs. And in particular, there are a few of them there written by Stephen Murawski from Stack Exchange, who is really pushing the boundaries of what people are doing with DSC at this early stage. So that's just going to take a little while to pull those in. And essentially you would install DSC resources in much the same way as you would a module that you'd retrieved from the internet. So we've got quite a list here, as you can see. There are the built-in ones, the Stack Exchange resources, as I mentioned. We've got a number of them that start with C, which is the convention that's been decided upon for the naming of community resources. And the one right down at the bottom there that begins with X is one from the DSC resource kit on TechNet, and that is actually a resource for managing desired state configuration, and in particular for getting your pull servers up and running. So let's have a look at that. Now this configuration again is from TechNet. This is one that you can download. I've only made a couple of minor changes to this. One is because I haven't got a security certificate on this machine. I'm just going to allow unencrypted traffic to my pull server, which obviously you don't want to do in production. And because this is a module that's not built in, we have to use the import DSC resource and just point at the module that includes the code for this. Resources, incidentally, are made up of some PowerShell code that really made up of 3 functions and also a schema. So we're just going to run this configuration. And this is a far more complicated setup than the simple website that I put up before. But what the pull server allows you to do is, rather than pushing a configuration to each of your nodes, even though those would be updated, those would keep in sync with that configuration, the pull server, we can tell our clients, that the managed nodes, to go to the pull server and to actually look for their configuration, make sure it hasn't changed. If it has changed, they'll get the new one, and they'll then use that until the next time they pull the pull server, which is a function of the number of times they're actually checking the configuration anyway. The other thing that they'll do, which is really interesting, and this is the reason that I have all those resources installed on this machine, is that they'll actually pull updated versions of the resources down from the pull server. So let's just have a look. We'll test to make sure that that's worked. Unfortunately, we aren't going to have time in this video to go much further than this. But hopefully you can see that actually something that's really quite complicated, setting up a server for essentially updating the configuration and the resources on your clients, has been made incredibly easy by using somebody else's resource, one in this case that came from Microsoft. So we've kind of run out of time, but I hope that's given you a little taste of how easy it is for people who even haven't got any knowledge of PowerShell to jump on board and try and do some things using DSC. I expect we'll see far more resources available from the community, from within Microsoft, and also, as I said before, there are other tools that can author the MOF files. The first step of this doesn't have to be done in PowerShell if you're already using something like Puppet, and I expect we might even see products like System Center creating MOF files and coming with DSC resources in the future. So we looked at the fact that this is a declarative extension of PowerShell. Previously everything had been imperative. We've looked at the two different ways of pushing configuration, pulling from a pull server, and we've touched very briefly on extending DSC, writing your own resources, getting them from the web, whether it's from TechNet, from PowerShell.org, repositories like GitHub. And I hope that you'll have a look at what other people are doing with this. There's some great content out there. PowerShell.org is a really great place for that. Don Jones, who's another PowerShell MVP, is writing a book on DSC with Stephen Borowski at the moment. Keep an eye out for that. So thank you very much for watching. I've been Jonathan Noble. Again, you can find me at JONoble on Twitter, other places. If you are on Twitter talking about today's event, please use the hashtag UKMVPCloud. You can find the CloudOS website at that particularly unfriendly link, but I'm sure you'll find it linked wherever you found this video. My user group, AnyBytes, if anybody's ever in the northeast of England, we meet once a month. We'd love to see you there. Check out the website for our events. And if you want to find out more about the MVP community, mvp.microsoft.com. Thanks very much. I'll catch you next time.